as we record this on the 20th. Paul McCartney released a press statement, Q&A. Uh, I think Peter Brown was it
Yes.
said later on that he actually did the questions himself. Paul, we didn't know.
Well,
With the,
some have said Derek Taylor has helped him with that, but from what my understanding, it was just Peter Brown.
yeah, so there was a lot of questions there about whether or not the Beatles are still functioning as a unit and everything else, and it went on the Daily Mirror headline from this. Somebody leaked out and stuff that it was said Paul is making the decision to quit the Beatles, and it's always been aimed at him that he's the one that kind of did this. But it is true that nowhere really in there do you really hear definitely saying, yeah, it's over, it's finished. We're done. Um, Even I used to think that was the case. I even made a video on it recently and was talking that way more or less because I think even though it didn't come out and really say I'm leaving for sure and it's over, I think maybe that's where he might have been going. But we can just talk amongst ourselves one at a time, and then other people can chime in and we can figure out what do you think. Now there was a quote by John around the time where he said, is this going to be a death or a rebirth? And I think he said maybe it's a rebirth. I think it'll be a rebirth or something like that. And how exactly did he mean that? So I think we'll start with Tom this time.
Mm.
And Tom, what do you think of all this? What's your feelings on a breakup and how it went down and everything?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Well, being 14, 15 years old when in the mid 80s, mid to late 80s, and learning about that at first, I mean, when growing up it was all Yoko this, Yoko that, Yoko this, and then now, as the years have gone by, and the more research that I've done and the more that stuff that we're still learning about
Yes.
this, you come to understand that maybe it was supposed to happen. This should have happened. This breakup should have happened to get that rebirth that John was talking about, perhaps. At first, I would imagine if you were a fan since '62 or earlier, and your whole life was the Beatles at that point in time, yeah, that April 10th was probably a very sad day, almost as bad as a relative passing, maybe. You never know. But for me personally, I looked at it now as, look at all the great music that we've gotten over the last 50 years.
Hmm.
Especially if you're a fan of the solo stuff, like we all are. And, would the quality of music of the Beatles, if they had continued, would that have continued to grow? Would they continue to be leaders in the field? Would they keep being inspirational? You never know. I mean, the pressure to continue doing what they were doing had to have just been so high that from time to time you'd have to expect them to kind of like stumble a little bit, like they had with maybe Magical Mystery Tour or maybe the Let It Be movie. Just opinions.
Hmm.
Anyways, but I mean, as I look at it now, I think it was necessary. Especially when you listen or read about all the dealings on with management, with rumblings between the two, with marriages, kids coming into the picture, interests are starting to go into different directions. So I look at it as it was a necessity. It had to happen, and I'm fine. I'm totally fine with it.
I'm inclined to agree. What do you guys think? Kit?
Well, I tend to agree with Tom now, and I'll be interested to hear those who are watching right now and watching the replay and everything. Those of you who were our first generation fans, I know as Tom said, you're going to have a completely different experience. But yeah, as a second generation fan, yeah, I mean when we have the benefit of hindsight, reading the whole story, learning about the whole story, it was inevitable, I think. I mean, when you even if you put all the business differences aside, and that was a lot. I mean, that was a huge contributor to the breakup, no question. The Alan Klein stuff, that was enormous. But but you also look though where they were going creatively, and personally. I mean, they were all, they were leading different lives. I mean, they were all, as you said, getting married, having kids. They weren't the same people that they were when
Right.
they first got together. They were in completely different places. George Harrison was budding as his own artist. I mean, he was really coming into his own. He wasn't the little kind of kid brother anymore. He needed, I think, to go out on his own, and boy, did he prove that when All Things Must Pass came out. I mean, wow. So, that was going on. John was going in a different direction creatively. I mean, Plastic Ono Band, when that came out, that was completely different than what the Beatles were doing. I don't know if he could have produced an album like that with the Beatles. And Paul was having his own issues, with what he wanted to do. So I think, creatively they were ready. I think they were ready to just go out and do their own thing. And maybe they would have been kind of creatively stifled had they stayed together. And who knows, if they had tried to stay together, who knows if they could have kept up with, could they have topped Abbey Road? I don't know. I mean, that's pretty damn hard.
Could they have competed with the music of the 70s? Could they have competed with disco?
Right.
Could they competed with the different genres? Well, as separate as solo artists.
Right. Yeah.
Would there even have been a disco if the Beatles was still dictating?
Well, that's I mean, that's kind of that's an interesting question. And so, but yeah, but you just think, I think they, in a way, they did the right thing going out on top, because I just think, to then, if they had put out some albums that would have in any way tarnished that legacy, I just don't know. But mainly I just think that they were ready to do their own thing, and I think the creative directions they were going in, I just don't know if they could have done it together. So, those are my 2 cents.
I know a lot of times, some diehard fans, usually the fans that don't really venture too much into the solo career or don't go past 73 or 4, they usually will say, well, I think the Beatles could have stayed together and made albums till at least 73, 74, because they had such strong stuff. But I always wonder, would those songs, as great as some of those solo songs are, still sound the same and as good? I mean, would Instant Karma be quite as good if it was a full Beatles song, or It Don't Come Easy, or Photograph, or all the songs and All Things Must Pass? What makes them what they are is, I guess, how we've come to know them,
right?
And that we love them. But what would it be like if it had been the 4 Beatles? I mean, Beatles were great together. Put them together, the 4 of them together, it's magic. But I like a lot of those early songs, the way solo songs, the way they are anyway.
Right. Would they have been able to? I mean, because we know what September 30th. We know that they were planning on doing, working on the next album after Abbey Road, and how they were going to do it with 4 songs for John, 4 for George, 4 for Paul, and 2 for Ringo. Would that formula, could that have worked? Even with all the material they were still all bringing in, would that have satisfied each ego enough to continue?
Yeah, good point.
Well, I guess so. Now we'll go to Ken, and Ken, I'm really excited to hear your full thoughts on this. Let's save it for last because I know it's going to be good. So.
Well, you guys stole everything that I was going to say.
I got to go after you.
No, really, you made so many great points there, and just what you said just now, Joe. There are so many people who assume that had the Beatles continued together, that the songs that they put out on their solo records would have been better as Beatle recordings. And that's ridiculous. It really is. There's no doubt about the magic that the Beatles had when they were together. But they were growing apart musically. I could hear Ringo being on every solo album, for the others. Because, Ringo is so easygoing. He could fit in doing anything. But I can't really hear Paul and George backing up John on the Plastic Ono Band album on those songs. Those songs work because of the rawness and the intensity of that lineup and the way that it was produced. I think it would have lost something if it was a full band like the Beatles. It would have taken out the rough edges of an album like that. I can't hear John and Paul backing up George on All Things Must Pass on the songs on there, the
Mm,
spiritual side of George, even though there were those
Yeah.
few in the Beatle years, like Within You, Without You, and George was the only Beatle on that one, actually. But no, it's kind of wrong to assume that those songs would have been better had the Beatles done them. Somebody said on Facebook, "Oh, if the Beatles did Jealous Guy, it would have come out better." I love Jealous Guy the way it is.
I
I
Yes.
agree.
can't
I
imagine it
agree.
being any more perfect
Yeah.
than the
Plus, they
way.
worked on
Well,
that song. They worked on that song
Yep.
already as the
yeah,
Beatles.
Yeah.
Like when it was
no,
put, and the road to Rishikesh, I don't think was going to be any better than how Jealous Guy ended up.
yeah.
Agreed. Agreed.
But
Mhm.
yeah, and maybe I'm amazed. I've heard people say, "Gee, if the Beatles did that one, what's wrong with the way that Paul put it
Well,
out the
first
way
of
it is?"
all, even that
Yeah.
song itself is about the frustration and the upsetment and confusion that he's feeling because of
Right.
what they're going through.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I don't think it could be as appropriate if they were still together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd
I
be a
can't
little
see
weird.
all of them. Yeah, I can't see all of them working on "Isn't It a Pity,"
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true.
or or
Yep.
or, or "Run
Or
of the
Wawa.
Mill."
Or
Oh, yeah,
Wawa.
"Wow
Yeah,
Wow,"
that'd
"Run of
be
the Mill." Yeah.
really
You
inappropriate.
know. Yeah.
Although
So
that'd be kind of revenge for George,
You,
but yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you really think Paul's going to play bass on "How Do You Sleep"?
Yeah.
I don't think we would have God with
no.
John's version of God, where he doesn't believe in Beatles either. I
Yeah.
don't think.
But I just remember at that time, I remember hearing about it. I was 10 years old
Okay.
when the news came out about it. And I know if I was older, I would have felt it more. But
Hmm.
even though I grew up as a little kid hearing all the Beatles music and loving it and getting all the albums and getting all the songs and devouring that catalog, I never felt that big a loss because at the beginning of the year we had Instant Karma.
Hmm.
Right before this, Sentimental Journey. As this was happening, the McCartney album. I knew Let It Be was right around the corner. Later on in the year, you had Buku's of Blues, Plastic Ono Band, All Things Must Pass, where you had all this new music hitting us. I didn't feel as if the Beatles stopped making music, that would have been a loss. But they gave us so much more breaking up. You got
Hmm.
so much more music out of them than you would have had they stayed together and kept with that format. And I always remember, and it's my favorite interview from anybody, what John Lennon had said in 1971 to David Wigg, that the reason why the Beatles broke up was because they had to stick to a certain formula, and that's what caused trouble. It wasn't fair that George Harrison always got 2 songs per album. Certainly
Hmm.
towards the end when he was ready to bust out. You know, you think about the Get Back Let It Be sessions and what comes out on Let It Be, the album For You Blue and I Me Mine, when he's got
Right.
all these other songs that make All Things Must Pass. Why couldn't they do those songs? I could understand Wawa.
Too many,
Yeah.
too
But
many, too many chords, as
Yeah.
John once said.
yeah, you know, I also don't think that it's fair that Ringo get 1 song per album,
Mhm.
you know? And I know that it sounds crazy because I love the Beatles to death, the greatest band of all time. If I had a choice between 4 solo albums a year or 1 Beatles album a year, I'd rather have 4 solo albums because there's so much more music. And I enjoy the solo music every bit as much as the Beatles. It isn't a question of what's better. It's just, I just genuinely enjoy the music,
Yeah, I think that's a
and
good point. I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
there's a lot of solo Beatle albums that I like just as much, if not more, than certain Beatle albums. I
Right.
can listen to All Things Must Pass and Living in the Material World, Flowers in the Dirt, press to play. you know, there's so many of them.
Only Love
You know,
Remains.
Yeah.
yes, but
Yes.
I can listen to those albums with the same kind of regularity. In fact, I listen to the solo music more than the Beatles music. And like I said, it's never been a question of making comparisons. Because if you compare everything there is to the Beatles, you might as well not listen to anything else. There's so much more great music out there to explore. And the four Beatles went and had, that's another thing, the most successful solo careers of all time, which is
Mm.
something that isn't said enough. And I think it's probably one of the most extraordinary accomplishments that any band has ever done. And yes, it's true, the Beatles were so great together, the most influential band of all time, not just the most commercially successful, but the fact that all four of them had successful careers in terms of hit singles and hit albums.
Yep.
And it's just, it's something that we take for granted. And a lot
Yeah.
of people overlook it. They really do. You know, we did a show here on myth busting, and
Yeah.
one of the things that I didn't bring up is that they always say, well, Ringo was the most successful Beatle in the first half of the 70s. And there's no doubt about it. He had a string of 7 top 10 singles from 1971 to 75. Paul was always the most successful. But, you know,
Mm.
a lot of people put that out there and people buy it and they believe it. But still, it's very impressive what Ringo did with 7 top 10s and 2 number 1 singles and 2 top 10 albums. But in terms of actual record sales, he was the least successful of the four of them overall. But who in their right mind wouldn't want to have 7 top 10 singles and 2
Yeah.
top 10 albums?
Right.
And
Yep.
like I said, he was the least successful.
But would it be
Yeah.
fair to say that Ringo and George were first out of the gate, really, if
Mhm.
not the most, but we're out of the gate were impressive right away.
Well, certainly George with All Things Must Pass, yeah.
Yeah,
That just floored
My
everybody.
Sweet Lord,
Yeah, and
Yeah.
What Is Life was also a top 10 hit. No doubt about it, but Paul always had the hits from Another Day. If you're just talking about the first 5 years, he had more hits still than Ringo
Mm.
and more number ones than Ringo. I'm not putting Ringo down. Ringo, like I said, who wouldn't want to have what Ringo had?
Well, do you know
But
the supposedly the telegram that John sent to Ringo saying
oh yeah,
congratulations, how dare you, and please write me a hit record?
that's great.
Something like that. I love that. Well, I wanted to say I don't have much experience. I was alive when they broke up. I was just a few days shy of my 8th birthday, so I was 8, and I always liked the Beatles when I was a boy. Um, and all I really remember is at times maybe I would discuss the Beatles or bring them up to adults, and they would say, "Oh, the Beatles broke up." You say they broke up. They don't play together anymore. I seem to remember that, and I'm like, I didn't really understand the whole thing. I remember hearing that quite a bit. The Beatles broke up. They broke up. Finally realized what was happening. I have memories of my earliest memories of the solo stuff. Probably around. Well, I remember My Sweet Lord very clearly. I had that record, and I also remember hearing Uncle Albert, which I love. I love then and now. Sitting on the stoop on a summer's day, listening to AM radio as a 9-year-old and hearing Uncle Albert and loving that. And it don't come easy. So I started getting a real feel for the solo stuff. Uh, as far as whether the Beatles breakup was a dark day or a bad thing, and I think I'm kind of in sync with what Tom said in the beginning here. I mean, for fans, real veterans, ones that followed them from the very beginning. If you were in England and you went to the Cavern and or whether you're from America or England or anywhere in the world, you follow their careers all the way. I mean, it is a sad thing to see it come to an end. Regardless, I mean, any which way, it's not really a pleasant thing. It's an unhappy thing. But you're talking about having different avenues to explore. I grew up mostly after, I really became aware mostly after the Beatles. So you have great Beatle music, then you have 4 avenues. It splits, and you have all this wealth of material from 4 different artists, like Ken
Right.
was saying. So I kind of I think it's a good thing in retrospect. I definitely think it had to be. I think they really, if they had gone on any longer, I don't think it would have been possible for them to continue to astound everybody all the time. I think it's pretty amazing that music-wise, they always did top stuff. They never really fell on their faces. Oh yeah, like Magical Mystery Tour as a television special didn't get great raves at the time, but that's just a little stumbling, very small quibbles thing that happened to them. But otherwise, they always scored tops. I think eventually, if they'd carried on, they would have had an album like "Dirty Work" by the Rolling Stones. I, something that's not well received is what I'm saying. Whether you like "Dirty Work" out there or not, I'm just saying. Uh, they had to have eventually. You can't be doing that forever. John used to say that too. You can't expect this to be, always on the top, uh, astounding people indefinitely. So that's why I'm kind of glad they kind of ended on a high note. It's a perfect legacy. It's like pretty flawless, and I like the outcome, especially with hindsight. I don't think if I had been 17, 18 or something, and I'd grown up with it all along, I would have been really probably sad too. But I didn't grow up then, so I'm okay with it.
Yep. Yeah, there's some great comments here. I just want to throw in that people are saying really great. Yeah, John Maley said I would have never gotten wings, so I'm happy. So that's true. Yeah, there would have been no wings, and wings was. I figured you'd like that. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I mean, Wings was a great group. I mean, no question. They did some wonderful. It's a lot of hits, and they're great,
Sure.
great stuff. And of course, the tour. I mean, those tours, particularly, the mid '70s, and I mean, no question. My buddy Tom Green brings up a point that I think has gotten a lot what I call the Genesis argument, which is couldn't they have just done side projects and solo stuff but stayed together? So what do you think about that?
Even though the Beatles, like George, had Wonderwall music and
Yeah, they were
electronic
still
stuff,
kind of doing that.
but as far as like pop albums, that was still unheard of to have both careers
Mm.
going on simultaneously. And later on, certain bands like Fleetwood Mac had success with that, or the Eagles, Genesis. But it also complicates things. It's hard
Yeah.
on an artist to be in a band and have a solo career at the same time. How do you juggle that? It's
It's That's funny because I have that Genesis documentary that came out a few years ago, and Tony Banks likes to argue that it would have been nice if Phil Collins would have brought in the Air Tonight instead of using it for his solo career. But then Phil will argue, no, I did bring it in, and he just doesn't remember it. So I would see a lot of that going on if that was the case.
right.
Yeah.
Imagine some of these artists when they tour and they have to question what belongs in my solo show and what belongs in the group show.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I put solo numbers in the group concert?
Right.
It gets kind of complicated. It does.
And plus,
So
I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah.
John and George were that motivated to do something like that. Well, Paul probably would have been motivated to
No,
do
but the
Yeah.
thing
something
is,
like
it's funny
that.
because I know, Ken, you were talking about the David Wig interview. There's a real
yeah,
quick bit in there where John says, "Well, I suppose we could have worked together," and then he gets
right.
right at that point, it gets like cut off. Another thought comes in, but he got distracted. But he was starting to say that, and I seem to remember something with George saying that at the time. Are there clips a clip from George talking about that audio wise during the Get Back stuff that maybe they could do that?
Yeah.
They could.
Well,
There's an interview that George gave in 1970 in May to Howard Smith at WABC and WPLJ, where he's kind of talking about maybe doing solo projects and maybe get that out of the way. And then you also have the Beatles projects too. And he also
mhm.
said in that very same interview that it would be selfish for the Beatles to break up.
Yeah.
So this is actually
Oh,
after
right.
Paul's announcement.
Right, but before all the lawsuits as well.
True,
Yeah.
true.
You
But the
know.
thing is, it's such a complicated thing. And the more you
Yeah.
learn, the more you're fascinated, the more you
Yes.
bury yourself into it. And then once you apply, even though it wasn't really news about the meeting that the Beatles had to have another album after Abbey Road, and it would be more balanced with 4 songs each with John, Paul, and George. The mere thought that they were even considering that, tells you something that maybe they wanted to go on longer. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
even though Paul said what he did, for George to come out after that statement and say what he did, maybe they all felt that they were still in limbo. Because
Right.
at
Well,
any given
with the
time, it all really came down to John. and
Yeah.
if John really wanted to do it. John would have
Right.
to initiate the reunion.
Right. So
So
with that question and answer then that Paul gave with promotional copies of McCartney, I mean the one that strikes me the most is the question: is your break with the Beatles temporary or permanent, due to the personal differences or musical ones? Answer: personal differences, business differences, musical business are differences, but most of all because I have a better time with my family. Temporary or permanent, and as a question, I don't really know.
Right.
So that right there just tells you that,
Yeah.
maybe there still is a chance.
Yeah, and
Which,
I think,
well,
and again, I think we all tend to remember that interview. I know I did until I went back and reread it for to prepare for our show. That we tend to remember it as that was his announcement that he was breaking up with the Beatles. That and
right,
when you go back and look at it, you read that part and you think, oh yeah,
right,
actually he wasn't. I mean,
right.
he was certainly announcing a temporary break, but
Yeah.
he didn't say that's it, we're done.
but at
Yeah.
the same time, he can come across being very cold
Yes.
in this interview with
Oh,
these
for
one-word
sure.
answers of
He
no.
was. Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
The question: do you foresee a time when Lennon and McCartney becomes an active songwriting partnership again? No. That's it.
Right.
Well,
Just no.
that's pretty.
Well,
That's
I
pretty.
I wouldn't be surprised if he felt like he was getting the cold shoulder himself. I mean, here he is getting ready for his solo career, and he's being, pretty much begged not to, or told not, you cannot release this. Right
Hmm.
around the same time, postpone it until the summertime. You
All I'm
know,
saying is that it
yeah,
appears to be cold to the public when
yeah.
you read
Yeah.
it like
Okay,
that.
Oh, for sure.
fair
Yeah.
enough. Fair
Yeah,
enough.
I think it does come across as cold. Not that I blame Paul, but at that time he was kind of at the end of
Hmm.
his rope too.
Right.
But that leads me into like something else I wanted to talk about.
Mhm.
Just before, didn't Paul call John and say, I'm doing what you and Yoko are doing, and I'm releasing an album or something like that? Uh, what's the history of that? Do you guys know? I mean, I remember something like that. I'm doing what you are doing, and I'm doing an album too, or something. I'm leaving
Well,
the group.
John pretty much said, "Well, I'm glad that you agreed or you came to your senses, and I'm proud of you for taking that step." You know.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but John was upset that Paul used it as a way to publicize the new album.
Yeah,
You
that's
know.
the other
Yeah, he
thing that I
was.
always and Tom maybe could set me straight on this if I'm wrong. I don't know, but we were talking a little about this off, the other
No.
day. The thing is, I always thought I made a video on this for the anniversary, and I said, and maybe wrong-headed, not really sure, but I always felt that John said he was going to leave the Beatles. It was like a divorce, and all that kind of stuff in September of '69 after the Peace in Toronto. Life Peace in
Hmm.
Toronto show.
Right.
And Klein and I would guess Paul too. Like don't say anything. Don't
Right. Well, that
keep
was
it quiet.
Klein. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think didn't Paul agree to that? Want him to be quiet too?
Yeah, I mean, he
Klein.
agreed to that as well. But I mean, after after the contract negotiations finalized, you got that from September, which I believe happened that day. It was finalized when John had that meeting. If I'm correct, I mean, if I'm not, please let me know if anybody else knows. But I mean, so then you have September all the way till April. That's plenty of time. Those contracts are now done in the books. The week before, I think they finalized the one with the EMI. So now all they had to do was concentrate on the capital one. That got done. So then now why can't John take that opportunity to say, hey, look, okay, this is the situation,
Hmm.
and take it for what it is.
At
Yes.
You
some
Well,
know,
point,
that's
somebody
what I
has to
wanted
say
to
something.
check on exactly because I wasn't clear on whether or not it was. Could you just keep your big mouth shut until the papers are done, till the contract's done, or
but
not
that's
just the contract, but anything to the contract?
but again, how long should Paul wait
Well, he
Right.
until
wanted the Beatles.
John
He's the only
feels
one of the four of them that was keen to keep it going.
exactly?
And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, he's the one. Oh,
Exactly.
I'm leaving.
Why does he have to wait to release stuff when John is releasing stuff nonstop?
But he
I
didn't
mean,
Mhm.
say I'm.
he's releasing 3 singles. He's releasing a live album. He's releasing 3 experimental albums with
Yes,
Yoko.
but none of
Yeah.
them with a
Why does
self-written.
Paul have to
Well,
wait?
Because none of them are with a self-written interview that I'm leaving the Beatles. He just
Yeah.
kept doing it on the side, like we were talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
And he
well,
was the one that should have said, "I'm leaving the Beatles and I'm doing this." But he kept
Yeah.
his mouth quiet to do them a favor, I thought. And then Paul turns around and he's like, "No, I'm the one." Even though I was the one who was fighting to keep us all together, I'm the one that really wants out.
Yeah.
I
but
don't know. That's how I
also,
feel about it. But as Tom, as you say,
yeah.
if I'm wrong and it was just about the contract? Like, could you keep it low key till we just finish this?
It says,
business?
a viewer, Jeremy says, Klein told Paul and John to both shut up about it due to the new Capitol deal.
Capital
Correct.
deal. Yeah, that's true.
But what did you want to say, Ken?
Yeah, what do you want to say?
Just that, the normal course when you release a new album is you give interviews and you promote it. And Paul didn't want to give interviews. This was his way of, he has a Q&A, he answers the questions that are on people's minds, gets that out of the way, and that's how he handled it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I look at him doing this as, if you love something or someone, you set it free. If it comes back, then it was meant to be.
Sounds like a good song.
Yeah. I think somebody sang something like that before. I mean, that's how I look at it now. I mean, in hindsight, we see that he was the one that wanted the Beatles to continue. He's the one that wanted them to, to go back to doing live stuff. He's the one that we need to thank for having the White Album, Abbey Road, and Let It Be. He's the one that, tried to, light a bomb up everybody else's butts to get them motivated.
Yeah.
So, why not do it like this?
Mm-hmm. But
if you think about it, I'm sorry. If you think about it, Ringo left the Beatles during the White Album, but he came back. George left the Beatles during Let It Be, but he came back. For the Beatles to really break up, it had to come down to John or Paul.
Yeah.
And John was the one who said he wanted a divorce. It was up to him to initiate if they were ever going to do anything together again. In my personal opinion, if John had asked Paul would have said yes immediately. He would have done that.
I understand. I understand. I get that. But it wasn't the case. And then so therefore, how long should he have waited? I mean, how long did he need them?
Even after the McCartney album.
Yeah.
They could have gotten back together if they wanted to. You had to have all four parties agree to it. But like I said, I really believe deep down it had to be John to start it all.
And maybe John, John, for all his bravado and everything, he could be a little afraid, like what would life be without the Beatles? Can he really walk away, even though he came on all inspired by the Toronto gig to do it? He didn't really come right out and announce it afterwards, after the paperwork was done.
Well,
I guess he could have done it in early '70, right? He could have.
He could have. Yeah, he had every opportunity. He could have done it with instant karma.
Yeah. What's interesting though is, like you were just saying, Ken, about how Ringo left the band during the White Album, George left the band, during the Get Back sessions and everything. I mean, this whole thing was just coming to a boil for some time. You knew this was going to happen. And I even found, an interview where, and I'd seen this before, but I hadn't read this quote in a while, that, John was even saying when they all convinced Paul that they had to stop touring, when they finally said they had enough, and that he said, then he even thought, is this going to be the end? What do we do now?
Right.
We were so used to touring, and that's when he thought maybe I ought to start doing something else, which is, when they took time off, he, went off and did the movie and, and that kind of stuff. And then, of course, Brian Epstein dies, and okay, my God, what are we going to do now? Or we got, so they had these different moments, and then, during Sgt. Pepper, John was starting to kind of disconnect, and all that. And I mean, it just, you just, when you go back and look at the history, this was all coming to a head eventually.
Right.
And
this was meant to be.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, when you look back on it, the breakup was just bound to happen. It really was.
And looking back on it, how did this go over everybody's head?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The Beatle thing is over. It has exploded. How does that get missed? How does that not, how do we not hear John or George not saying anything about that?
Yeah.
And that was in November of '69.
Well, it was released in November of '69. I think the actual interview itself was in late October.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
So, how does that get overlooked? The funny thing I find about this whole article on Paul, it's at the end of the magazine. That quote is on the last page of the magazine.
Maybe
Yeah.
people misinterpreted what Paul was saying there, like
It's
that,
possible.
like all the excitement of the
Hmm.
Beatles is waning now. The
Yeah.
Right.
Beatles are over.
It's a way to look
It's
at it.
yeah, that's
Abbey Road
possible.
had just came out the month before, or a month and a half before.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
So
true.
And that
Yep.
was number 1 around the world. So
yes.
how could their
Mhm.
popularity be waning?
But that
But
is pretty close after. If it was October, that's not too long after John's I want a
Right.
divorce
Mhm.
statement. So
This was during his depressed time
yeah.
or
hmm,
period.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
anyway,
I just wanted to get this. And of course, we said that George really like wow. He had all this material, and that was his creative peak. He was really exploding at that time, 68, 69, like that, 70, like around that era, and that made me think. If I can just backtrack to what we were saying in the news, remember we were talking about Paul on the Howard Stern show last week. Did you
hmm,
notice Paul also? He covered that a lot too about George really blooming and
hmm,
everything. He talked to Howard about that too, about how there was really no room for George on the albums either. So
Hmm.
right. Could I read something here that I brought?
Please.
no,
Sure.
by all
Since
means,
you like to bring up the fact that I'm into the charts.
Mhm.
Um,
You're the chart king.
I've been following the Billboard chart since I was, I don't know, since 1970, listening to American Top 40 with Casey Kasem, always rooting for Beatles and solo Beatles singles and all the albums too to do well. But for anyone that questions the success of the solo Beatles, what I did was write down how many number 1 hits they had and how many top 10 hits they had. And I did that for their albums too. This may shock a lot of you, especially people who are new fans who don't realize the success the Beatles had
Now,
here.
are you going UK and US to get
Just
combined,
US,
or just US? Okay.
just US. Okay.
Okay.
Number 1 records, the Beatles as a group had 20 solo careers, and that includes everything, includes Wings, um, comes to 16. You
Hmm.
might not think they had that many. They had 16 number 1 hits, top 10 hits. The Beatles had 34 as a group. In their solo careers, they had 43.
Hmm.
So they surpassed what the Beatles had as a group. And even if you say, well, the Beatles were only 7 years, yeah, but you have all these other singles that came out after their breakup. Got to Get You Into My Life was a top 10 single in
Hmm.
1976. Free as a Bird was a top 10 single in
Right.
1995. So that counts too. The Beatles movie medley was almost a top 10. But those
Hmm.
those singles all count. Um, Albums, number 1 albums, the Beatles had 19, solo careers 13. Top 10 albums, Beatles had 31, solo careers 35.
Hmm.
If you count the Traveling Wilburys, 36. Okay? So in both areas, the Beatles as a group rule with number 1s, and top 10s, the solo careers rule. So, but it's so impressive. It just goes to show how
yeah,
life went
sure.
on. They did so well on their own. And, I'm so impressed with their careers. And I'm still impressed with what Paul and Ringo were doing. I think because they all carved out their own identities on their own. They
Hmm.
have their own individual styles. Nobody in the world sounds like any one of those 4 guys. They all had hits. They all had big selling albums. Paul is still having, he just had a number 1 album with Egypt Station. So that continues. And that's not counting everything else. That's not counting all the successful tours that Paul has had and Ringo has had, especially. And the success that Paul has had on the classical charts, or with the Fireman, or the Traveling Wilburys and their success. There's so many avenues, and George with Handmade Films had a number of successful films there. So there's so many ways of looking at it. Life went on. It didn't just stop. And, I just think that it's the most extraordinary thing to be able to say that all 4 of them emerged on their own and did this well.
Yes,
Absolutely. And
I
as I
agree.
said before, doing some projects that I don't think they could have done with the Beatles. And
Hmm.
Hmm.
and that it just wouldn't have worked. And obviously not putting down what the Beatles did. It's just that, like I said, like with the Plastic Ono Band album. I don't see the Beatles making an album like that. That was John Lennon. That was his
Right.
sound, his voice, and I just don't.
They,
Yeah, I
yeah,
just don't see that.
they certainly weren't going to work on a Liverpool oratorio together.
Of course not. Yeah, I mean
Uh,
things like that, or I mean it just
Yeah.
wouldn't. So yeah, the solo years, they were finding their own voices, their own styles,
Yeah,
completely
right.
separate.
And George was able to delve into completely into the religious spiritual realm. I mean, he
uh-huh.
did a little of that. He did a little of that. Like I think Ken said before, maybe
Hmm.
somebody within you, without you, a little bit. But
Love You
um,
Too, yeah.
you
Mm.
could.
The inner
I'm
light.
glad we got Living in the Material World. I mean, you couldn't have. That's an album I like, and you couldn't have that really
Hmm.
with the Beatles, the whole album.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the flip side of that, even towards the end of the Beatles as a group, you hear so much about how John and George and even Ringo really hated Maxwell Silverhammer,
Yeah.
you know, or that they hated Obla Di Obla Da. Well, if they really didn't like doing those songs, they shouldn't have had to do them,
Yeah, they would have
you
vetoed
know,
him.
Yeah.
Mhm.
but they looked at the greater good of it all, and the fact that these are commercial songs, they proved to be very popular on the radio. Obla Di Obla Da was a big album cut, but if it wasn't in their hearts to do that, it's showing the direction they're going in, different musical directions. They shouldn't have to back up songs that they don't want to do.
And in the
Right.
case of
You
Maxwell
know,
Silverhammer, I think the main thing was that I think Paul allegedly made them do it so many times.
I've heard,
Is is
Yeah.
what it might have been. Not so much, maybe just the song itself. And people got to realize I don't love that song, but I enjoy it for what it is, and it actually has a dark theme behind it. All it's a serial
hmm,
killer. It's not, that's the creepiness of it. It's a la di da song, but about a guy that's killing people,
Yeah.
yeah,
murdering
I
people,
get a
murderer.
chuckle that it was that and Obla Di Obla Da that John, set aside for him to make that remark that, those songs should be given to other artists to do,
right. That was
during
in
that
that meeting.
September 13th. Yeah, the 13th, on the 13th, the week before, he asked for the divorce or told them
Mhm.
about the divorce,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, it's
We
those
just
two,
John,
Well,
those
at
John,
two
least he
meetings.
didn't veto. I know somebody
Yeah.
they veto cold turkey though, but
Well,
right.
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
I mean, but then
Perfect
again, I
taste.
mean, I think they realized that wasn't going to be, commercial, or the subject matter shouldn't have been, tackled by the Beatles, in a way, maybe,
Right.
you
A
know.
couple of great
So,
comments here. Mark P, longtime listener, viewer of ours,
hey,
said, "Yeah,
Mark,
yeah, hey Mark, yep, what's up?" He said, "Being stuck with just the same three guys must have been stifling. Sometimes you just want to
absolutely,
branch out and play with your other friends, yeah, and work with different
absolutely,
people."
and yeah, and to that point, December 11th and 12th of '68, that really had to have excited John Lennon when he got to participate in the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll
yeah, I
Circus.
was going to
I
bring
Mhm.
mean,
that up.
that had to have been a real big spark for him to want to get out of that situation.
Sure,
And
absolutely,
George too.
yeah.
Oh
Working
yeah,
with the
Delaney
Delaney and
Delaney
Bonnie
and Bonnie
tour.
tour.
Yep.
Yep,
Yep,
absolutely.
they said they
absolutely,
really enjoyed it.
And
yeah.
hanging out with Bob Dylan, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
collaborating with different people, absolutely nothing wrong with that. Also, have a great comment here from Beetle Ed, who broadcasts our show on Fab Four Radio.
Hey,
Hey,
Ed.
Matt.
Hey,
Hey, hey,
Ed.
hey.
Yes.
And he said, "Could we imagine Broad Street? Give my regards to Broad Street starring John Lennon." No, I really can't imagine that.
Oh boy,
Uh,
that's
you
the problem. I can imagine. I can imagine a lot of things the last 40 years, but I mean, we didn't get it, is what I'm saying. But
know.
we have to imagine because John's not here.
Yeah, I can't even envision that in any form.
No,
Yeah,
and
a
I always
couple.
said a
What?
million times, imagine John on a Howard Stern show. I
Right.
would have loved to hear Howard and John
Yeah,
go back
that
and
would have been
They
interesting.
would have
some
Yeah,
gotten
fun.
along great, I think.
Oh,
yeah,
they would
they
have gotten
probably would
along
have.
perfectly.
Yeah.
They would have made a pretty good team. If you don't mind me bringing up a couple quotes here from John that I found very interesting. Especially I think these two were from the first Rolling Stone interview when I don't know if this one is, but later John said Paul didn't quit. I sacked him. I don't know
Oh,
if you guys saw
Yeah.
that. And then later he said I was a fool not to do what Paul did, which is to use it to sell a record. Meaning the breakup.
Hmm.
no, he's
So
right
I
about that. But the
yeah,
sack thing, yeah,
yeah,
no, that was just as much as I like John. That interview was him just being
probably.
exaggerated just to try
Yeah,
to take the myth
Yeah.
off and be bitter and stuff. A lot of it.
yeah, yep,
Well, he was
that's
bitter
true.
about that for
Hmm.
sure. I
Yeah.
mean, like Ken said, I mean, he wanted to be the one to do it. It's just that how long did the other three have to wait in order for
Right.
him to do it? Was
Mhm.
really
Somebody had
kind
to
of be
say
probably
something.
the frustrating thing, right?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
hmm
yeah, that's true.
I know.
Well, that's all I can say is unless the keep your silence meant like kind of indefinitely, didn't mean just until we finish this deal.
My
I don't know if
understanding
I
was
don't know what
was
he thought.
yeah, my understanding was until they finished finalizing the capital deal because the EMI one was already done.
Yeah, yep,
Okay,
Hmm.
yeah.
so anything else? Time is pretty good. I'm loving
Yeah,
the time.
Well, I think we said a
So,
lot.
yeah.
all right. So I think so.
This,
I guess that's it then, huh? So
this
I can do the goodbyes.
Yep.
Let's
And just
all.
before, I just want to say
What?
that there are a lot of comments here, and we didn't have time to get to them all, but we will definitely, whether it's on Facebook or when we have this up on YouTube, we will definitely read your comments and respond to them. There are a lot of great questions here, a lot of great comments. We will not
Because I
ignore
haven't
Well,
been
them.
able to see. I haven't seen any.
Yeah, I
can
know
you
there
can
were
you can you
so many. We just didn't have time to get to them
Yeah.
all. Don't worry, we will not ignore them.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, thanks
well
everybody.
can you bring one up, Kit? Do we have time for one?
Let's see. Gosh, there's so many here.
Because I didn't see any brought up, unless just on my end. I didn't see
Yeah,
any
no,
questions.
Yeah, it's your
there
end.
are a lot of one of them. I actually okay. I'll bring up one of them, and and I apologize because it was way back up, scrolled up, so I don't know who said this. I apologize if you're still watching, you can let me know who said this. That if they had stayed together in the '70s, would they have been able to kind of remain cool with like the glam rock kind of
Ah,
phase and all that? Because and I do, that was kind of an interesting point because there was
Hmm.
sort of a phase in the '70s where particularly in England where the Beatles sort of weren't cool, that there was this kind of
Right.
rebellion against them. I thought that was
see,
an interesting point.
what I always say when
Yeah.
a lot of times when I'm discussing with people on my channel, I often say, well, the Beatles kind of innovated so many things. Would it have even gone in the direction of glam rock? Would it have gone in disco? I don't want to do this old cliche. The Beatles started everything
Yeah.
because people set me straight and they told me. Some people said, well, actually the Beatles already were kind of at the end were kind of like following more trends, like it was going a different way, even when the Beatles were still together.
Mhm.
Maybe with I don't know Zeppelin, or something like that. So I like to try to say, oh, maybe we don't know if we would have had disco. We don't know if we would have had punk.
Yeah.
The Beatles would
I
have would
yeah.
have decided which way it was going to go.
I
That's
think some of
exaggerating.
No,
them.
I
I
don't.
think some of them kind of dip their toes in certain genres. For sure. I think if you're going to talk glam rock, I don't know what you think, Ken, but what do you think? What you got was a little glammy. The song you don't know what you got until.
No.
You don't think it's
I
glam?
don't know what
Okay.
you.
No, I
Well,
think it's more
Yeah.
R&B,
Okay. All
funk.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. But they did. I've never thought of Silly Love Songs as disco, although some people look at it as disco.
Yeah, they
Good
call
Night
no.
it disco.
Tonight, I used to think was disco. Lawrence Juber always says to me it's not a disco song. But there are people who are under the impression that was disco, and
Daytime,
certainly
nighttime
Paul.
suffering, maybe a little disco
Mhm.
beat, maybe.
No, not at all.
Boom, boom.
Nothing like that. But
I mean,
Well,
there's
I like
Joe.
disco, so.
I like disco too, but
I
Paul
love
has always
disco.
dabbled in a little bit of everything, you
Yeah.
know.
Mm.
But I
Yeah.
don't know. The four Beatles were going in such different directions, all four of them. I can't see them, leading another movement, In the 70s, it would have been very diverse, their music, and they would have had to have accepted what the others were writing, even if they may not have really been crazy about it.
Right.
It's like I said, I love All Things Must Pass to death. It's one of my favorite albums. It's such a
Me
masterpiece.
too.
I can't hear John Lennon or Paul McCartney working on those songs and
Mm,
being on those songs.
mm,
I just,
Mm.
it's, even when Paul was doing All Things Must Pass in concert, at the concert for George, he had to learn the song. Like, you don't really know this one.
He
It's
should
it's
have.
kind of
Yeah.
a classic, but I think it's kind of, out of his ballpark there. It doesn't fit with the kind of music that he would want to do. They were all going in different directions, and it's beautiful that they were able to
I-
explore that and put it out on their own. It
Right, would
works on
George?
their own.
Yeah, right. Would George be able to accept not playing the slide guitar in anybody else's songs? Because
Hmm.
we know how much he loved doing the slide guitar.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I can't
Yeah.
hear. I can't hear John and Paul backing up silly love songs.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, come on. I could
yeah, no,
never, I
come on.
could never see that happening. So they all went in their own directions, and they were all successful at it.
Mhm.
In varying
Yep.
degrees. And
Mm.
even when there were periods like George, the last of the 70s, the last 5 years, the Psalms did well, 33 and a third, and George Harrison, top 20, had a few hits there, came back big time with Cloud Nine in 1987, had all the success with the Traveling Wilburys. So there were peaks and valleys, but overall, they all did extremely well. And Paul is still, charting
Mhm.
very well. If
Absolutely.
if if a Paul album doesn't hit the top 10, if it goes top 20, that's a bomb for him. That's
Yep.
that's how we look
Yeah.
at it. You know,
Yeah.
but just
True.
about everything he does goes top 10 or or
Yeah.
uh, or number
Well,
one.
And we have
cool.
to do a show someday on setting people straight. Sorry, folks, who think that McCartney, after like he didn't do anything really like into the mid '80s beyond. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah. He did some great albums
Oh,
after that.
I mean, come
Absolutely.
on. I mean,
it's funny. There was a survey that I posted. I think all you guys saw, um, of the top 10 solo
Yeah.
Beatle albums.
yeah,
And I love the list, but it disturbed me that the person who wrote it, 9 of the 10 albums were all from the 70s.
Mhm.
Mm.
And I love the 70s, and it will always be such a rich period, mainly because the first 5 years you had John, and he
Yeah.
was putting out albums along with the other three. Nothing like having albums from all four pretty much at the
Mhm.
Right.
same time. But when the 80s went on, I think Paul and Ringo's best work. Oh, I love a lot of Paul's stuff in the 70s. I think he really came into his own in his solo career with Tug of War and then from Press to
Yeah.
Play On. Some of his
Right.
best
Yeah.
stuff has been, in
Flowers in
all
the
those
Dirt.
decades. And Ringo, Time Takes Time On,
Mhm.
has
And
been his
yeah.
best albums
yeah.
except for
From
the
Time
And
Ringo
Takes
album.
Time on is
right.
definitely
Yeah.
Return
Yeah.
to
And
Form.
Time takes
and
time.
the
Oh,
and
great album.
whenever somebody does a top 10 top 20 list of solo albums, it's always going to be the same. The top three is always going to be the same, just in maybe a different order from time to time. It's always going to be All Things Must Pass, it's always going to be Band on the Run, and it's always going to be Plastic Ono Band in the top three.
Or
Don't say
Imagine.
you
always.
know oh
Or Imagine.
I yeah,
I think they're all
or
worth. I mean,
Ram.
I imagine yes, and I think Ram. I think they're all worthy. I mean, I have a
All
hard
great
time because
albums. You bet.
Right.
while I agree with Ken. I mean, there's so much good stuff later that people don't even probably don't even listen to. Half of them probably haven't even heard it. The stuff.
Mhm.
Never mind, listen to it and say it's not up to snuff. They probably haven't even heard it. To tell you the truth,
Right.
so
Yep.
a lot
And
of them
yep, we have a
making
viewer
these
here that
claims.
says that it is Jeremy said it's scary even at Beatle Fest to see the number of fans who are oblivious to 95% of the solo work. And that's
Yeah.
why
Exactly.
Yeah.
we're here. That's
Yes.
why our
Yes.
show is here.
That's why the show exists. That's why I want to be a
Well,
part of it. Damn
That's
it.
right.
that this is why I say the most impressionable time in a person's life when music has the greatest impact is in their adolescence, teenage years, and to a lesser degree in their 20s. If you're a parent and you're bringing up kids and you've got Beatles music as a group and they're learning that, which is fantastic, play some solo music too.
Yep.
Expose them to that. Don't force feed it on them, but I
Right.
guarantee you many of those kids are going to like that music too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well,
Absolutely.
that's why
Cool.
You know,
I wish that the Sirius XM Beatles channel, which I've had off and on, but I can't take it because, and although I do love the shows like Fab Forum and things like that, those I like, but the music lineup, other than who is it? I forget his name. Chris Carter, I think.
Yeah.
Playing like a lot of different stuff, because you can play. I understand having to take care of the masses. I understand you got to play Michelle and you got to play, I don't know, Help and whatever. But then play Save Us, and
Yes.
then after that, you go back and you can play I don't know, Mother Nature's Son, and play. I saw her standing there, and then instead you play Consciousness Rules, but you sneak them in there
Right.
as you go
That's,
on.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I do.
And you
in
do it
every
on
way.
your show. That's
You
what.
know.
That's what you. And you did that from when I first heard you back. In the New Jersey
WDAK. Yep.
DHA days, and that's what I would think they should do. Now, and I've heard the argument. People have told me, well, you know why? Because most people that listen to it, they just want to hear the Beatles. And I say, well, that doesn't really fit for me when you're playing people who influenced the Beatles. Now, I love Buddy Holly and I love Chuck Berry, Little Rich, all those guys, but that doesn't fit with their narrative. If you're saying that people just want to hear the Beatles, it makes more sense to me to play solo Beatles.
It's not about the hardcore fans anymore.
Yeah, but
Well,
it makes more sense.
This could turn into 10 programs. It really could.
Yeah, that's why you let me know when you want me to say the goodbyes.
I just want to say one thing, because even though a lot of people will not agree with this point of view, I look at everything that the Beatles have done, group and solo, as all one body of work. I really do. It all comes down to mainly the songwriters. Nowhere Man is a John Lennon song in the Beatles. Mind Games is a John Lennon song in his solo career. They're both John Lennon songs. If you mix the two of them together, it's still the same four guys. It's whatever they created. And in most cases, like in John, Paul, and George, you've got three of the greatest songwriters of all time. And Ringo has developed into a very good songwriter too.
Yeah, yes.
So it's the same four people. It's just not, the solo music is not with all four of them together. But it's the same minds. It's the same creative brains. It's it's the same. It's the same four guys. So
John
to
said
me,
it.
yeah. But that's how I look at it, and I wish the world would look at it that way instead of separating everything.
Well, we'll work at that every couple of shows. We keep banging it in there.
Yep.
Okay.
Pounding it. Boom. Pounding it into the heads. All right, folks.
right.
So this has been a blast as always. So I think what we should do now is wrap it up, where we each could give our credentials and where you can find us and so on. Beginning with Kit.
All right. Well, you can, of course, find me at my website. You can find me on Facebook and my Facebook page, Kid O'Toole's Keynotes. And you can also find me on Twitter at Kid O'Toole. I'm going to be recording for a brand new podcast that just started and had a few guests, including our buddy Ken Womack was on just last week. I think it's called Fans on the Run, and it's and I'm sure you guys are going to be tapped for this podcast pretty soon. It's a new podcast where it's hosted by Ethan Alexian, and it's about basically how we became fans of the Beatles. It's strictly from the fan experience. So I'm really looking forward to it. So taping on Wednesday. Right? Yeah, taping on Wednesday. So I'm not sure when it'll be up, but of course, I'll have all the information up on my page. We'll get back to writing soon. As soon as I can. There's still things going on with my mom, and we're trying to get settled, and so as soon as I can, I'll be back to that. And also before we forget, you can find contact us here at Talk More Talk at Talk More Solo Talk at gmail.com. We're on Talk More on Twitter at Talk More Talk 1. That's the number 1. And you can find us on, because we're number 1. No, I was kidding. Well, maybe we are. And we can you can find us you can find us on Facebook, of course, on YouTube, and when the audio of this goes up, we're on virtually any podcasting platform you can think of. We're everywhere. You can't escape us. So, and please send us your ideas, your feedback. We
Ideas for
love hearing
shows.
from you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm realizing, by the way, that I didn't introduce myself at the top of the show. I'm Joe Mayo, otherwise known as Mean Mr. Mayo. Please check out my YouTube channel called Mean Mr. Mayo, where I talk about Beatles, solo Beatles, and other goodies. And now I take it right over to Tom Hunyadi.
Thank you, Joe, and Kit. Please give your mom our best. You know, we all been,
Yes.
making sure
Please.
we keep tabs on her, and we all hope that she gets back to 100% soon. So give her
Thanks,
a big
Tom.
hug and kiss for us. And
I will. I
you know,
appreciate that.
you got
Kiss,
it. You
kiss,
got it.
kiss.
Yeah.
I will kiss, kiss, kiss. That's
But
right.
no kisses on the
Just one more
bottom, though.
kiss.
Not only one more kiss.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, we want to give her. Never mind. Anyways, Two Legs. So yeah, you can reach us at twolegspodcast@gmail.com, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Two Legs Podcast. We just posted our last episode with Ted Montgomery, who did the excellent book, the Paul McCartney catalog. Check it out. It's on Amazon. You can get it there if you want. We just did a show with Ken Womack, which will be posted later this week. We did a George Martin, Paul McCartney 80s edition. So we talked about that. That was a good time. And we're going to be interviewing Chip Mattinger and Mark Easter tomorrow about the Eight Arms to Hold You book. And that'll be more Paul-centric because, they did focus on all four solo Beatles as artists. So we look forward to that as well. And yeah, we've been really busy, and thank you all for checking the show out. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
Wow.
Okay, Ken Michaels, you?
I need 48 hours in a day to keep up with what Tom's doing. I want to hear all those
Really?
shows. You're interviewing everybody. Way to go,
Yeah, we're
Tom.
trying to get them. Thanks. Yeah. Well, I got to keep up with you. You were the inspiration for it all. So.
Anyway, if you want to get in touch with me directly, my email address is everylittlething@att.net. The live broadcast of Every Little Thing is still on hiatus right now. The syndicated show continues. If you want to go to my website, kenmichaelsradio.com, there is a page for Every Little Thing, which lists all the radio stations in the country and where it airs, what time it airs, links to their radio stations. I just did an interview with Jerry Hammock. And
Nice.
this is my
Great
second
guy.
interview with him.
Yep. That's
He's put
volume 4?
That's volume 4. Yep.
Awesome. Yep.
Do you get to interview him, Tom?
I went for the last book because there's so many great solo stuff there that hopefully he'll be writing about, and we'll definitely talk to him then. Yeah. But yes, I have interviewed him.
Okay. He has put out a series called The Beatles Recording Reference Manual. This is the most recent one, volume 4. It takes you from the Beatles' White Album through Yellow Submarine, early 1969. For anyone that's curious about his books, they really are something if you want to learn all about how the Beatles did their recordings in the studio. It's different from what Mark Lewison did with the Beatles recording sessions, because what Mark did was on a day-by-day basis. This one breaks it down song by song, and it tells you all the days that they worked on certain songs, who was the producer, who was the engineers, who played on the tracks, what instruments each Beatle played on the tracks, if he knows accurately. Also, what model instruments, if he knows, what kind of amplifiers they used, and also how everything was mixed, which also includes, reduction mixes for 4-track, which they did all the time on their recordings. If you want to learn all about that, and there are diagrams in this book for every single page, and it looks something like this, and it breaks it down how everything started, and if tracks were transferred to other tracks in a reduction mix, how it was done. If you're fascinated by all that stuff, and it's done in such a way that it's easy to understand, and you don't have to be that technical.
Right. He is an engineer by profession, so he is very qualified to do this project.
You learn a lot.
So,
yeah.
The interview that I just did, I am now editing, and it's going to be on the website Wednesday or Thursday. Go to interviews page 4. I also have my Beatles trivia and games page where you can now win that book, the Jerry Hammock book. I have 2 copies to give away. Also, the Ted Montgomery book as well. And I did an interview just like Tom did with Ted. It's a world of Ted Montgomery here.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can hear that interview on Interviews page 4 as well. Right now, my website, there's a server issue, so you can't get anything on the website.
Mm,
It's going to change probably in a few hours, but check out the Beatles trivia and games page. There's 9 prizes to pick from. You pick one out of 9. There's a winner every single week, and the question this week has to do with songs from Yellow Submarine. So,
oh,
yeah, that's at kenmichaelsradio.com. Things we said today, we'll do a new show next week with Alan Kozin and Darren DeVivo, and we'll talk about the 50th anniversary. This is a year of 50th anniversaries of the first McCartney album.
yeah, and it's going to be great too because Cozen's working on that McCartney Legacy book with Adrian Sinclair, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. And from what he's told me, and from
Yeah.
what he's told Ken as well, it's going to be. It looks like it's going to be similar to the Lennonology series in a way where you're going to get, it's going to be in chronological order, and you're going to get the timeline, which is something that I've been really looking forward to seeing, because there's so much misinformation out there, and hopefully that they're going to get to the bottom of a lot of this information, which they have on a lot of items in our topics. So really looking forward to it.
Yeah. It's
So
almost impossible not to have misinformation. But as the
yes,
years
true.
go on, the books get
Yes,
better and better. Even Mark
correct.
Lewison said that the Beatles recording sessions has some
Yeah,
inaccuracies now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So as you learn more, as time goes on, then it gets better and better
Yep.
and more accurate. So
right. Cool.
All righty then. So, if we're done, I would say everybody, thanks for being here. And on behalf of Kid O'Toole, Tom Hunyadi, and Ken Michaels, I am Mean Mr. Mayo saying, remember, you can't reheat a souffle. So, on that note, see you all next time.
stay
Take care.
safe, everybody.
All right.
Yes.
Stay
Yes.
safe.
Take care.